China likes to present itself as a story of shared progress, hundreds of millions lifted out of poverty, gleaming megacities, world-class infrastructure. There are multiple posts on social media promoting videos of lead-covered skyscrapers, bullet trains and monumental subway stations. It's hard to tell if those are paid by China's Communist Party, or spread by genuine people who are truly impressed by that. All of this is real. What is rarely said out loud is that this success rests on a rigid system of inequality, one that is not accidental, not temporary, and not easily reversible. When people imagine the foundations of China's modern economy, they often picture millions of engineers working in highly automated factories and living in futuristic megacities filled with neon lights. This image does reflect life in places like Shanghai or Beijing, but it represents only a small part of the country. In reality, China's major cities are islands of prosperity in a country that remains largely rural and significantly poorer. Hundreds of millions of people formally registered as rural residents work in cities but do not have full access to urban benefits. Together with those who still live in the countryside, this group amounts to roughly 850 million people who may physically live in or near cities, yet legally and socially remain classified as peasants. These populations generally have lower levels of formal education, work in low-paid sectors, and earn substantially less than urban residents. In 2020, China's own Prime Minister acknowledged that around 600 million people lived on the equivalent of roughly $140 a month. That does not reflect average salary, it includes children, disabled and retired, but still, it means 600 million people only had average $140 a month to cover their individual needs. At the same time, China is home to nearly 800 billionaires and around 6 million millionaires, second only to the United States. This coexistence of vast wealth and widespread deprivation exists within a system that officially calls itself communist. China's inequality is driven primarily by the divide between cities and the countryside. This is not a recent accident but a structural feature of China's development model. After the founding of the People's Republic of China, rapid industrialization became the state's overriding priority. Industrial growth required one crucial input: a large supply of cheap labor. The countryside became the main source of that resource. Through collectivization, artificially low procurement prices for agricultural goods, and restrictions on population mobility, resources were systematically transferred from rural areas to cities and industry. This approach was explicit. Later, during the reform era, Deng Xiaoping openly argued that uneven development was acceptable, that some people and regions should get rich first, and prosperity would eventually spread to the rest of society. This was a deliberate trade-off. Growth was prioritized even if it produced inequality. There is no doubt that this strategy raised living standards dramatically. Extreme poverty declined, cities modernized, and average incomes increased. However, the underlying logic of development has remained largely unchanged. Today, this redistribution mechanism operates through the household registration system known as hukou. Officially, the system exists to maintain order and stability in cities. In practice, it divides citizens into categories with unequal access to opportunities. People with rural hukou who move to cities often provide the labor that keeps urban economies running, working in construction, factories, logistics, and services, but they do not receive equal access to public education, healthcare, or social security. Their children frequently attend underfunded migrant schools rather than regular public schools, and medical care often requires out-of-pocket payments. The simplest way to understand hukou is to imagine two versions of citizenship within the same country, urban and rural. On paper, they are equal. In reality, they are not. Economic inequality is commonly measured using the Gini coefficient, where 0 represents perfect equality and 1 represents extreme concentration of income. Most developed Western economies fall between 0.3 and 0.35. Even the United States, often criticized for inequality, scores lower than China. Official Chinese figures place the country's Gini coefficient around 0.47. Independent studies, which account more carefully for high incomes that are often missing from surveys, estimate it closer to 0.57. If these estimates are accurate, China ranks among the most unequal large economies in the world, comparable to countries like Brazil or South Africa. This inequality is not abstract. Two teenagers may live in the same city and see the same skyline, yet face completely different futures. One may attend private tutoring, study programming, and receive medical care at international clinics. His parents are professionals who plan for overseas education and see a clear path from schooling to career. The other may live on the industrial outskirts, help parents in a small food business, and attend an overcrowded migrant school with limited resources. Access to higher education is uncertain, and a serious illness could mean financial ruin for the family. The dividing line between these lives is not effort or talent alone. It is often a single administrative record stating where someone was born. In theory, it is possible to obtain urban hukou through education, skilled employment, or years of formal work combined with social security contributions. In practice, these requirements strongly favor people who already had access to good schools, stable incomes, and social connections. For children of migrant workers raised on the margins of major cities, this path is largely inaccessible. As a result, inequality becomes inherited, not only through wealth, but through legally defined access to opportunity. In 2021, China's leadership declared that absolute poverty had been eliminated. According to official methodology, around 100 million people were lifted above a defined income threshold. At the same time, China enforces some of the strictest content controls in the world. Public displays of extreme poverty are often removed from social media, as are displays of excessive luxury. The stated rationale is to prevent social tension and pessimism. As a result, poverty does not disappear, it becomes less visible. The persistence of this system is rooted in economic structure rather than ideology. For decades, China's growth model relied on transferring resources from households to the state and the export sector. Household consumption has remained unusually low, around 35 to 40% of GDP, compared to over 60% in the United States and Europe. Wages are relatively suppressed, the currency is kept weak to support exports, independent labor unions are banned, and the tax system relies heavily on indirect taxes, which place a greater burden on lower-income households. Savings are tightly controlled through the banking system and capital controls, allowing the state to channel household wealth into infrastructure, industrial policy, and global investment projects. The result is globally competitive companies alongside financially fragile families. Many Chinese households are no longer officially poor, yet they lack financial security. This condition, known as the middle-income trap, means that people can afford basic necessities but remain vulnerable to shocks. A job loss, a medical emergency, or a collapse in housing prices can erase years of savings. China still lacks a fully universal healthcare system, and medical expenses can be devastating even for working families. From an official perspective, these individuals are no longer poor. From their own perspective, stability remains out of reach. China's inequality is not a temporary flaw or a policy oversight. It is a structural feature of an economic system designed to prioritize state stability, industrial competitiveness, and global influence over individual mobility. Reforming or dismantling this system would require more than social policy adjustments, it would mean rebuilding the foundations of China's development model. That is why the issue is discussed cautiously inside the country, and why the divide between prosperity and precarity continues to shape everyday life.